The Unfiltered Human on the Fringe episode 21, After the Fire Life in the Rebuild, the Ashes We Keep. What survives the burn? Welcome back to the Unfiltered Human on the Fringe, the space where we strip away the layers, sit with the raw stuff, and talk about what most people skip past. In our first arc, Shadow Emotions, we explored the feelings that most people hide, including envy, shame, guilt, and control, among others, learning to recognize them not as flaws, but as parts of ourselves with something important to say. Then, in Integration and Alchemy, Life After the Shadow, we turn toward transformation, asking how to weave the once hidden parts into a whole self, and how to turn our pain into power, connection, and deeper living. Now we step into the third chapter of this journey, Ashes to Architecture, the Rebuild. This is the space after the dismantling, when the fires have done their work, and what's left stands in stark relief. It's the quiet after chaos, where the urgency has passed, but the future hasn't yet taken shape. Around us are the remnants of what was, some still standing strong, others barely holding together. This arc is about choosing what to carry forward and what to finally let go of, and about rebuilding a life with intention, clarity, and depth. Today, in our first episode of this arc, we're looking at the survivors of our fires, how to recognize what's truly worth carrying into the next chapter, how to release what no longer belongs, and how to begin building again with purpose. So let's begin. The nature of survival, every ending has its sorting process, whether we're conscious of it or not. The fire, literal or metaphorical, tests each part of our lives for strength, relevance, and truth. The logic of fire picture walking through the remains of a burned building. Much is gone, walls collapsed, rooms exposed to the sky, yet here and there small things have endured. A chair still upright in a blackened room, a photograph whose colours remain sharp despite the smoke. At first glance, the survival seems random, almost arbitrary. But the fire has followed its logic, consuming what was most vulnerable and sparing what could withstand the heat. Life's upheavals work similarly. A divorce, a health crisis, a sudden career ending, they strip away so much, yet certain connections, abilities, and values remain. Sometimes it's the ones we thought would crumble that endure. Sometimes the things we believed were indestructible vanish without warning. And here's where the choice lies. We can rush to gather everything left and carry it with us, or we can pause and ask, do these elements truly belong in my future, or am I clinging because they're familiar? Personal reflection: I used to believe that anything or anyone who made it through my fires was meant to stay. I treated endurance as proof of value. If a friendship or connection remained through difficult seasons, I assumed it was a sign that it belonged in my future. Looking back, I can see that in those times I was often guarded, my walls built high out of self-protection. But even then, I did my best to be supportive and soft where I could, sometimes at my own expense. I allowed certain wrongdoings to pass without challenge, not because they didn't hurt, but because I didn't yet understand myself well enough to respond differently. Over time, I realized that not everything that remains is meant to be part of the rebuild. Some connections stayed out of habit rather than health. Some ways of being, though they once kept me safe, were quietly keeping me small. There's a deep honesty in saying, this helped me survive, but it's not helping me grow. That's where the real work of rebuilding starts, in recognizing that survival and suitability are not the same thing. Psychological insight. The way we decide what to carry forward after a major change is shaped by both emotional attachment and cognitive bias. Tedeschi and Calhoun's 1996 work on post-traumatic growth shows that while adversity can foster profound personal development, this growth only occurs when we intentionally engage with the question of what to keep and what to release. Without that conscious review, we risk dragging outdated roles, beliefs, and relationships into our future, where they may limit rather than support us. From a neuroscience perspective, the brain's salience network, Seeley et al. 2007, plays a crucial role in this process. This network, involving the anterior insular and anterior cingulate cortex, helps us detect and filter the most relevant stimuli in a changing environment. After upheaval, our salience network essentially remaps what we perceive as important. However, without deliberate reflection, We often default to preserving whatever is most familiar, even if it no longer serves us. A phenomenon behavioral scientists linked to status quo bias, Samuelson and Zeckhauser, 1988. The implication is clear: survival alone is not a reliable measure of value. A connection or habit may remain simply because it wasn't tested in the ways that others were, or because we haven't yet questioned its place. True rebuilding begins when we separate endurance from alignment, keeping what supports our growth, releasing what holds us in an outdated version of ourselves. Personal reflection. In building my current work, I've faced challenges at almost every turn, promoting my projects, finding the right audience, and convincing people to engage with something that doesn't fit the usual mold. My approach is different from others in the field, and there are days when it feels like my efforts are in vain. But each time I consider stopping, I come back to the same conviction: the perspectives and tools I'm creating will help people in the long run. That belief is one of the most valuable things I carry with me through each challenge. It shapes how I keep going and how I choose which ideas and methods to build on in the next stage. Insight prompts. When you think about your own fires, what has endured every time? Are those elements things you consciously value, or ones that simply remained? Theory in action. List 3 things, relationships, skills, or perspectives that made it through your most recent life change. For each, ask, does this feel alive? Could it grow with me? Would I fight to keep it? Choosing the foundations, once the smoke clears and the initial shock fades, the question shifts from what's left to what do I want to build on? This is where the work turns from reactive to intentional. The ground beneath you. Imagine you've cleared the debris from a piece of land. The ground is bare, exposed, and waiting. You could start building straight away, but without checking the soil, measuring the slope, and considering the weather that will hit it, you risk creating something unstable. In life, our ground is the set of values, skills, and relationships we choose to stand on after loss or change. Some may be part of the old structure, while others are newly discovered. The key isn't how long they've been with us, it's whether they can bear the weight of the life we want to build next. Personal reflection. I used to treat whatever was left standing as a natural foundation, as though its survival meant it was meant to be the base of my next chapter. But over time, I learned that a foundation isn't just what remains, it's what can hold what's coming. In my rebuilds, there have been times when I've wanted to launch straight into action, to distract myself from the discomfort of uncertainty. But rushing meant I built on weak spots. I've had to slow down and test my footing, asking which values feel non-negotiable now, which skills still energize me, and which relationships can grow with me rather than keep me where I was. Sometimes this meant realizing that something central in my old life couldn't bear the weight of my new one. Letting go of those parts wasn't easy. It felt like betrayal at first. But in hindsight, it was an act of loyalty to my future self. Psychological insight. The process of selecting foundations draws heavily on self-concept clarity, a degree to which our beliefs about ourselves are clearly defined, internally consistent, and stable over time. Campbell et al., 1996. After a major life change, self-concept often becomes unstable, making us more vulnerable to building on shaky ground. If we don't take time to re-clarify who we are and what we stand for, we can end up constructing our future around outdated or externally imposed definitions of self. There's also an element of values congruence. Christoph, 1996. The match between our values and the environments we place ourselves in. Research consistently shows that when our environments clash with our values, long-term dissatisfaction and burnout follow. Choosing a foundation that aligns with our current values increases resilience and motivation because it reduces the internal friction that drains energy. Neuroscience adds another layer. The ventromedial prefrontal cortex, VMPFC, plays a key role in evaluating long-term outcomes and integrating them with our values. Becerra et al., 2000. When we rush decisions after upheaval, this system can be overridden by the brain's short-term survival circuits, leading us to make choices that feel safe in the moment, but don't support sustainable growth. Personal example. In shaping my work now, I've had moments where the easiest route would be to imitate what others in my field are doing, to follow familiar patterns that might draw quicker attention. But every time I check in with my deeper values, I know that wouldn't be a stable foundation for me. It might get me short-term results, but it wouldn't feel authentic. By choosing to build on principles I believe in, I'm accepting a slower start, but I'm also creating something I know I can stand on for years without feeling like I've betrayed myself. Insight prompts. Which values feel unshakable for you right now? Are the skills and relationships you're relying on capable of supporting your future or only your past? Theory in action. Write down the 3 values you feel most committed to in this season of life. Then, look at one key decision you're facing and ask, does this decision build on those values or does it ignore them for short-term ease? The weight of what you keep. When the foundations are chosen, the next decision is about what else comes with you. Not everything needs to be rebuilt, but everything you choose to carry will shape the structure you create. Packing for the journey picture, standing in a room full of your belongings, knowing you can only take what you can carry. Some items are essential, practical, meaningful, or irreplaceable. Others have a sentimental pull, but no real place in the life ahead. And then there are the just-in-case things, the ones you keep out of fear that you'll need them someday. In emotional terms, we do the same thing after a life change. We carry relationships, habits, identities, and stories, each adding weight to the rebuild. Some weight strengthens us, grounding us in what matters. Other weight drags us, making it harder to move forward. The question becomes not just what do I want to keep, but how much can I carry without losing momentum? Personal reflection. I've noticed in my own life that I've sometimes carried more than I needed, simply because I didn't want to feel the loss again. I've kept relationships going long past their natural end, held on to roles that no longer fit, and carried emotional responsibilities that were never really mine to begin with. It wasn't because I couldn't let go. It was because letting go meant facing the truth that something I'd invested in deeply was no longer part of my future. And sometimes that truth hurts more than the actual loss. Over time, I've learned that every item in my emotional luggage costs me energy. Carrying things I've outgrown, even if they survived the fire, slows me down and keeps my hands too full to grasp new opportunities. Releasing them isn't about erasing the past. It's about lightening the load enough to walk into the future without being pulled backwards. Psychological insight. The decision of what to keep and what to release is deeply influenced by loss aversion, a principle from behavioral economics first described by Kahneman and Tversky, 1979. Loss aversion means we feel the pain of losing something about twice as strongly as the pleasure of gaining something of equal value. This bias often leads us to hold on to relationships, habits, and possessions that no longer serve us, simply to avoid the discomfort of loss. From a psychological perspective, emotional labor, Hochschild, 1983, is another factor. Carrying certain roles or responsibilities, especially in relationships, demands ongoing emotional effort. While this labor can be rewarding when aligned with our values, it becomes depleting when performed out of obligation rather than choice. The more energy we spend maintaining outdated commitments, the less we have for growth-oriented action. And neurobiologically, the hippocampus plays a role here, linking objects, people, and routines with emotionally charged memories. This makes it harder to view them neutrally. We're not just deciding whether to keep a chair, a job, or a relationship. We're deciding whether to carry the emotional story tied to it. That's why conscious, value-based decision-making is essential at this stage of the rebuild. Personal example. When I began developing my work in its current form, I realized I was still holding on to projects from earlier stages of my life. They were well crafted, they represented years of effort, and in some ways they were part of my identity. But they didn't reflect the direction I was going. Carrying them meant splitting my attention between the future I wanted and the past I'd already lived. Letting them go was uncomfortable, but it freed up both time and creative energy for the work that truly mattered now. Insight prompts. What emotional or practical weight are you still carrying from your past chapter? If you set it down, what could you pick up instead? Theory and action list 5 items you're carrying from your old life. These can be habits, relationships, projects, or mindsets. For each, ask, does this actively support the life I'm building, or am I keeping it to avoid the discomfort of letting go? Learning from the ashes. Once we've decided what to keep, we face a quieter but equally important question. What did the fire teach me? This isn't about dwelling on loss for its own sake. It's about making sure the experience changes us in ways that matter. Reading the burn marks. After a wildfire, investigators often study the burn patterns on the ground and walls to understand how it spread. The scorch marks become a kind of map, revealing the sequence of events, where it started, how it moved, and where it met resistance. In our own lives, the burn marks are the patterns we can trace back through the upheaval. The choices that worked, the ones that didn't, the signs we missed, and the unexpected strengths we uncovered. These patterns aren't always easy to look at, but they hold the lessons that shape how we build differently next time. Personal reflection. There have been times in my life when I wanted to turn away from what happened as quickly as possible, to move on, to rebuild, to prove to myself and others that I was fine. But in rushing forward, I sometimes skipped over the chance to understand why things unfolded the way they did. When I've allowed myself to slow down and examine the burn marks, I've noticed both the painful truths and the hidden strengths. I've seen moments where my instincts were right, even if I didn't act on them. I've seen patterns in the way I gave trust too quickly in some areas and held it back too tightly in others. And I've learned that the parts of me that stood firm under pressure are the ones I can lean on more in the future. This kind of reflection isn't about blame. It's about gathering the wisdom that the experience cost me, so the price I paid has meaning. Psychological insight. This stage of the rebuild closely aligns with reflective practice and meaning making, both of which have strong roots in psychological research. Park, 2010, describes meaning making as the process of reinterpreting experiences to align them with our core beliefs and values. When this process is successful, it can transform even deeply painful events into catalysts for growth. From the perspective of cognitive appraisal theory, Lazarus and Folkman, 1984, the way we evaluate and interpret an event directly shapes our emotional and behavioral response to it. Taking time to analyze the burn marks is essentially an intentional reappraisal, which neuroscience has shown can reduce emotional distress by shifting activity from the amygdala, emotional reactivity, to the prefrontal cortex, rational evaluation. There's also a connection to experiential learning theory, Kolb, 1984, which emphasizes the cycle of experiencing, reflecting, conceptualizing, and experimenting. If we skip the reflection stage, our ability to apply the lessons from one challenge to the next is significantly weakened. In other words, without reading the burn marks, we risk walking straight back into the same kind of fire. Personal example. When I've looked back at the challenges in developing my current work, I've seen how my approach to promotion and outreach has shifted. Early on, I tried to adapt too closely to methods that didn't reflect my strengths, simply because they were popular. That choice slowed my progress and drained my energy. The burn mark was clear. In future, my strategies need to be built around my authenticity, not borrowed formulas. That insight alone has already changed how I'm planning my next steps. Insight prompts: what patterns or burn marks can you trace back through your last major challenge? Which of these holds the clearest lessons for your future? Theory and action. Choose one event or period of upheaval in your life. Write down 3 things you would do differently if faced with a similar situation again, and 3 things you would repeat exactly as you did. Use this as a blueprint for your next chapter, designing for who you're becoming. When the lessons are gathered, the temptation is to simply recreate what was lost, a safer, updated version of the old life. But a rebuild is also a rare opportunity to design for the person you're becoming, not just the person you've been. The blueprint shift architects don't just restore buildings to their former state after damage. They often update the design to reflect new needs, technologies, and possibilities. A rebuild is a chance to correct weaknesses in the old structure, make it more sustainable, and adapt it to the way people live now, not the way they lived before. In life, This means moving from how do I replace what I lost to what do I want this next version of my life to look and feel like? It's a subtle shift, but it's where true transformation happens, when we stop trying to return to what was and start creating what could be. Personal reflection, I've noticed that in the past, I sometimes measured my recovery by how close I could get back to normal, the version of my life that existed before the upheaval. It felt safe to aim for something familiar, even if that version of my life was already out of step with who I was becoming. These days, I try to think differently. I ask myself, if I were starting from scratch right now, knowing what I know, what would I build? That question changes everything. It opens up ideas I wouldn't have considered if I were just trying to get back what I lost. It also makes me more honest about the fact that some things I thought I wanted no longer fit the person I'm growing into. This approach isn't always comfortable. It means admitting that some goals I once poured myself into aren't worth carrying forward. But it also means my new blueprint reflects the life I want to live now, not a life I've already outgrown. Psychological insight. The shift from restoration to reinvention aligns closely with the principles of intentional change theory, Boyatzis, 2006, which emphasizes the importance of having a compelling vision of the ideal self to guide personal development. Rather than focusing solely on repairing deficits, ICT suggests anchoring change in a clear and energizing picture of who we want to become. This also connects to the possible selves theory, Marcus and Nurius, 1986, which proposes that our future-oriented self-concepts, both desired and feared, influence our motivation and behavior in the present. When we consciously design for our hoped-for selves rather than just avoiding our feared selves, our decisions become more expansive and creative. And neuroscientifically, the default mode network, Reichel et al., 2001, the brain system active during self-referential thought and imagination, plays a critical role here. Engaging this network through visioning and narrative thinking can help us mentally simulate future possibilities, making them feel more tangible and achievable. Without this step, we risk defaulting to familiar but outdated life structures simply because they are easier to imagine. Personal example. In shaping my work now, I've stopped asking, how do I make this look like other successful projects in my field? And started asking, what would this look like if it truly reflected my values, my style, and the kind of conversations I want to have with people? That small shift has completely changed the way I design my content, my outreach, and even the way I structure my time. It's slower, more deliberate, and far more aligned with who I am, and with the person I'm still becoming. Insight prompts. If you were starting completely fresh, what would your life look like now? Which parts of your current blueprint come from habit rather than conscious choice? Theory in action. Sketch out a blueprint for your next chapter, not in architectural detail, but in qualities and values. Write down how you want it to feel, how you want to spend your time, and what kinds of people you want to share it with. Then compare it to the life you're building now. Where are the gaps? Building with what you have now, designing for the future, is powerful, but eventually, every rebuild comes down to this. What can I create with what I have right now? Waiting for perfect conditions can stall the entire process. The first brick every structure, from a cottage to a skyscraper, starts with one small action, placing the first brick. It's rarely the most impressive part of the build, but it's the one that makes the rest possible. In life, the first brick might be a phone call, a small investment, a conversation, or a single change in daily habits. It might feel insignificant, especially compared to the full vision in your head. But it's often these early modest steps that prove to us we're capable of moving forward, even before we have every tool, skill, or resource in place. Personal reflection. I've had moments where I've hesitated to begin because what I could do right now didn't feel big enough. I'd tell myself I needed more time, more preparation, or more clarity before taking action. But those pauses often stretched into long delays and sometimes into complete standstills, debilitating procrastination through fear. I've learned that when I act with what's available, even if it's imperfect, I begin creating momentum. That momentum does something important. It reveals what's possible, instead of leaving me trapped in what's only imagined. I can adjust, adapt, and improve once I've started, but nothing changes until I take that first step. Psychological insight. The hesitation to act until conditions are right is often linked to perfectionism, particularly the maladaptive form identified by Frost et al. 1990, where high standards combine with fear of failure to create paralysis. This pattern can prevent people from engaging in the very activities that would lead to growth. Behavioral activation, Jacobson et al. 2001, a therapeutic approach developed to counter avoidance patterns, emphasizes the value of taking small, meaningful actions now, rather than waiting for motivation to arrive. Research shows that action itself can create the psychological energy we associate with readiness by engaging reward circuits in the brain, especially the striatum. There's also relevance here to self-efficacy theory, Bandura 1977, which highlights that our belief in our ability to achieve a goal grows through experience of mastery, even small-scale mastery. The first brick may feel minor, but laying it can significantly increase our confidence to continue building. Personal example. When I first began sharing my ideas in a public way, I didn't have the perfect format, branding, or platform. I simply used the tools I already had, even if they felt basic compared to others in the field. That initial work wasn't polished, but it proved I could create, share, and reach people without waiting for an ideal setup. Many of the opportunities I have now wouldn't exist if I hadn't placed that first imperfect brick. Insight prompts. What is one small action you could take today toward your rebuild? What stops you from taking it now? And how might you lower that barrier? Theory in action. Identify one aspect of your rebuild that feels overwhelming. Break it down into the smallest possible starting action, something you could do in less than 30 minutes with the resources you have right now. Do it today, and note how your mindset shifts once it's done. Living in the rebuild. The moment the walls go up and the roof is on, it's tempting to think the work is done. But a rebuild isn't just about creating a structure, it's about learning to live in it. Moving in. When you move into a newly built home, everything feels unfamiliar. The light falls differently, the walls echo. The furniture may not yet be in its perfect place. Over time, though, you start to adapt. You learn which corners feel safe, which windows bring the best view, and where you naturally gravitate when you need comfort. In life, living in the rebuild means giving ourselves time to settle into the new patterns, relationships, and responsibilities we've created. Even when the work is complete on paper, it can take months or years to truly feel at home in this new version of ourselves. Personal reflection. There have been times when I've rushed through this stage, eager to prove that my rebuild worked. I'd fill the calendar, commit to new projects, and try to convince myself that the transition was complete. But beneath the surface, I still felt disoriented. Now I try to give myself space to live in my rebuild slowly. I take time to notice what feels right and what needs adjusting. I've learned that the first version of anything new is rarely the final one, and that's not a failure. It's a natural part of making something truly mine. The more I practice patience here, the more I notice the small victories. A conversation that flows more easily, a decision made with less fear, a day that feels lighter than the last. Those moments tell me I'm not just building, I'm inhabiting. Psychological insight. The process of settling into a new life structure can be understood through adjustment theory, Schlossberg 1981, which examines how individuals adapt to life transitions. Research shows that adaptation depends not only on external resources, but also on the fit between our new circumstances and our internal capacities. From a neuroscience perspective, the neuroplasticity of the brain plays a critical role here. When we enter a new environment or routine, neural circuits must adapt to support new patterns of thought, emotion, and behavior. This adaptation takes time, and premature judgment of success or failure can interfere with the consolidation of these changes. There's also a link to hedonic adaptation, Brickman and Campbell, 1971, the psychological process by which people return to a baseline level of happiness after significant life changes. Understanding this can help us avoid the trap of expecting constant highs in our rebuild. Instead, we can focus on creating sustainable satisfaction through daily choices and meaning making. Personal example. In my current work, I'm still in the process of moving in. The systems I'm building, the ways I connect with people, and the pace I'm working at are all new. Some days the unfamiliarity feels exciting, other days it's uncomfortable. But by treating this as a living process rather than a finished product, I'm able to make changes as I go, and each small adjustment makes the whole structure feel more like home. Insight prompts. In what areas of your rebuild do you still feel like a visitor rather than a resident? What small adjustments could help you feel more at home? Theory in action. Spend a week observing your current routines and spaces. Each day, make one small change, move something, adjust a habit, or try a new way of doing something. At the end of the week, reflect on which changes made the new environment feel more yours. Living in the rebuild. So if you've ever stood among the ashes, wondering if you could start again, know this. The fact you're even asking the question means you're already building. A rebuild isn't about recreating what was. It's about shaping something that can hold the person you've become. Some parts will be familiar, some entirely new, but all of it will carry your fingerprints. Honor the pace that feels true for you. Let your walls rise slowly, your windows open wide, and your foundations be as deep as you need them to be. The people, habits, and dreams meant to belong in this new space will find their place naturally. And when you live in it, truly live in it, you'll see that the architecture was never just about survival. It was always about becoming. You've been listening to the Unfiltered Human on the Fringe. Until next time, stay human, stay awake, and let it breathe. James Miller. If you found value in today's episode, you may also be interested in my broader project, The Inversiverse, a series exploring the hidden architecture of perception, identity, control, and consciousness. Across 20 episodes, The Inversiverse dissects indoctrination, language, media manipulation, dark psychology, belief systems, and the evolution of self in the digital age. You can find all episodes of The Inversiverse on Facebook, YouTube, Rumble, and Substack by searching this place called Earth. These ideas aren't shared to convince you, but to invite you to think, feel, and perceive more consciously in a world designed to keep you distracted. Overview of The Inversiverse. A journey through the mirrors of mind, culture, and control. Episodes 1 to 3 introduce foundational ideas around indoctrination, perception, and manipulation. Episode 4 explores how language, symbols, and cultural norms are used to shape thought. Episode 5 investigates control systems, media narratives, and the illusion of choice. Episodes 6 to 7 dives into collective belief structures and the psychology of mass behavior. Episode 8 focuses on marketing, control theory, game theory, and critical thinking. Episode 9 covers love relationships, human mating, gender dynamics, and red-blue pill ideologies. Episode 10 unpacks dark psychology, the occult, Satanism, and the dark triad personality types. Episode 11 The Simulated Self examines identity, ego, and the rise of post-human consciousness. Episode 12 The Spell of the Mind inquires into language, illusion, and physiology of thought. Episode 13 Conscious Seduction journeys through persuasion, propaganda, and the unseen forces of the mind. Episode 14 The Myth of Sanity sheds light on madness, genius, and the edge of perception. Episode 15 The Algorithmic Mind probes influence, identity, and invisible architects. Episode 16 The Noise of Knowing reveals overload, obsession, and the age of infinite information. Episode 17 Belief Machines delves further into language, desire, and the engine of reality. Episode 18 Submerged Signals examines how the unseen shapes the self. Episode 19 The Alchemy Within traces food, frequency, and the forgotten intelligence of the body. Episode 20 Encoded Flesh scrutinizes and opens up to the forgotten language of the body, DNA, and biological consciousness.